This is the last panel of the day of this conference, and I have sort of been in and out the last sort of 24 hours here, but I think so far I have been impressed by the depth of knowledge, by the commitment by the people here, and I want to thank the sort of Kissinger Institute at the Wilson Center for holding this, and also for the Asian Research Foundation for putting this together. I think it's very productive so far for those of us that are China watchers and China hands. I work with the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom, which is the best way to put it is a congressional sort of think tank, policy think tank on religion and religious freedom. So I have been working on China issues and Asia issues now for the last 20 years. So I think this is, I'm optimistic when I hear all of you and also the speakers and the panelists as well about the thinking that's going on and hopefully the change that is going on in China as we speak. We have 3 panelists, and we have 4 panelists. Oh, there we go.
Sorry.
I'm glad we're all together. We didn't flip a coin, so I will go from here down to Professor Durham at the end. But so first up, we will go with Professor Zhou Fu Chu from the National Central University in Taiwan.
照着这个大会的议程，我应该是最后一位的这个发表者。不过呢，既然我们的主席指定我先发表，我想这个我就先来做第一个这个论文的发表。那当然，原来我是准备了作为最后一个发表者还是要谢谢这个从始至终的谢谢季辛吉基金会，还有呢亚洲研究中心费财费力那个举办这么一个研讨会，让大家有机会把所有的这个看法，我们所做多年研究的结果能够汇聚在一起，有机会大家一起讨论。那么大会给我的这个题目是呢，21世纪这个中国的这个本土政教关系的模式。那当然这是一个非常好的题目不过在这么一个短短的时间这个要做完整个题目事实上是非常困难，所以呢我就先把这个题目聚焦在目前的这张投影片上所表现的是关于呢这个科层化。等一下我会介绍一下什么叫做科层化一般呢在中文呢也称它为官僚化。科层化跟这个政教关系之间的这个我们的再省思那么在末了呢我也呢以一个台湾基督教长老会与呢地方教会做一个呢比较分析那做了它这个一个进一步的这个显示科层化跟政教关系的这个关系。好，那么第一部分先跟各位介绍一下这篇论文的想法是这样是希望从这些年，自从是1987年之后这个台湾解严了，那么在台湾的宗教是这个迅速而且呢非常蓬勃的发展。那么这是一个经验，因为台湾的社会花了这个30多年的时间那么它这个经验是不是可以提供给华人社会？那当然呢在这里呢主体就是中国一个可能可以考虑的一种的政教的本土的政教模式。那么台湾是1987年开始呢这个解严，那么很多人在当时就想这个一解严，接下来的会不会就是呢这个混乱一场的混乱？那事实上在过程中呢，的确是有宗教学者说台湾的宗教的发展是用了打混战这3个字呢来形容它，因为的确呢过程中是有一些敛财啦，这个假宗教的名义却呢这个做犯罪之事的这些事实，所以呢有这样的这个学者的这样发言。但是到了去年2010年，在一次呢大型的关于宗教的论坛里面，有许多的学者他他们呢不约而同的都说，台湾这些年除了有经济奇迹以外， 再来就是有宗教奇迹，甚至于台湾岛可以称为是一个宗教岛。所以到底它是打混战还是宗教奇迹啊？就看了你是在什么样的尺度里头。你在一个小的尺度里头，你可能认为它是打混战，但是从整个台湾的社会来看，事实上它是一个宗教奇迹。那么在这里呢，也就这么多年来，那么有2个在台湾最大的这个基督新教的团体，一个就是长老会，一个是地方教会。那么他们的政教模式在是呢是截然不同的。那也就在这个背景之下，我们来做一个探讨。很快来看一下，台湾呢是对于呢宗教立法是很多年啊这个来这个努力的，有多长呢？1953年。1953年，台湾政府就开始呢要立宗教法。那1953年是由内政部呢要立的是宗教法啊。当时呢这个基本上你可以看得出来，还是管理的精神，还要去判定什么是邪教。譬如说一贯道曾经是相当一段时间呢被视作为邪教，这个不能够这个光明正大的聚会的。但是到了1987年解严之后，整个观念改变了，所以到了1999年开始呢，这个台湾政府所尝试立的法是叫做宗教团体法，并且立法的方式呢是用呢这个找学者，找呢特别是宗教团体的领袖们、代表们来成立一个宗教的咨询委员会啊。那么2003年事实上有了第一次的一个结果，就是呢在立法院这个宗教团体法的草案一读通过了。不过呢，在台湾的立法院的规定是这样：如果在这个立法委员的任期之内没有3读通过，这个法案就归零。所以到了2004年，这个法案就归零了。然后2009年再一次又是呢立法院第一次通过。那么再下来呢，就是明年2012年又要立法委员选举，现在已经是2011年的10月了。所以看样子这个法案呢，又可能是没有3读通过而归零。那么将近60年的时间这个在做立法，为什么会这个立法不成功呢？这篇论文呢，主要就是探讨，事实上是因着台湾宗教有一个特点，就是呢，台湾许多的宗教，特别是几个大的宗教，有科程化的现象跟它的困境就跟这个宗教立法不能成功很有关系。那我们来先介绍一下科程化。科程化在中文也可以翻译成官僚化。那当然呢，这个在目前的中文的语境里头，官僚是一个负面的用词，所以呢，基本上这个在社会学者来说，这个科程化可能是比较中性的，因为事实上在许多的组织里头是需要有一种的这个组织上的一个阶层那么这是它的科程化。那科程化对于宗教团体来说，事实上它有它的优点，也有它的缺点。它的优点就是它能够快速的发展，它能够得到更多，借着课程，借着形成组织，可以得到更多的这个社会跟经济的资源不过它的缺点呢，就是让政客、让政治人物这个很容易的借着掌控总会就影响整个团体。还有呢，事实上这个宗教团体它有比较大的这个，因为科程化它就形成集中的权力之后，它会破坏社会的这个公平性比如说等会就会看到这个宗教团体法里面之所以后来被一读后挡下来，主要的原因就是因为其中有一个法条说，宗教团体占用了公有土地5年以上他就可以申请让售。如果这个宗教团体法通过的话，那当然这个对这个宗教团体来说是个很大的利益来源。可是对于呢这个反对派的立法委员来说，为什么要让这个执政党能够把这种利益给宗教团体，所以就反对了这就破坏了社会的这个公正性。那么这就是呢这个宗教立法不成功一个相当关键的原因那么台湾的立法呢，事实上是找了这4个这个天主教、道教、佛教，还有呢这个基督教的长老会的领袖来在一起，形成了一个立法的这个修法这个委员会。但是呢，事实上呢，他们都某种程度上赞同目前的草案，但是真的心里所想的是，他们非常不满意目前的草案。为什么呢？因为目前的草案没有给他们就着一个组织科程化所要的东西譬如说天主教就担心这个法通过了，这个许多的小天主堂也可以各自去跟政府登记， 就离开了整个天主教的这个制度。那么道教、佛教更是这样啊，在国民党这个执政的时期，有全国的道教总会，有地方性的道教分会。然后呢，现在呢，事实上一解严之后，这个原来这个属于这个总会、属于分会的这些会员，现在已经不交会费了，他们可以自己互相联合，形成另外的山头。所以呢，再加上长老会也类似这样，我想细节呢，在我的录里头我就不去细讲了。所以呢，他们表面上是同意了一个草案，但是事实上里面所想的都是呢，跟他们这个团体所要的呢，是这个中间有一个非常大的一个 gap 在那里，有一个鸿沟在那里。那么就根据这个背景，关于呢这个组织科层化的它的这个宗教团体的影响，我们也来看。在台湾，因为我身为一个基督徒，我当然对基督新教的这个教会稍微熟悉一点。我们就来看在台湾2个最大的这个基督教的团体，一个就是这个长老会，简称 PCT， 另外一个就是呢地方教会。那么说它是最大的，事实上是有各种的分析报告、统计数据，那也有呢许多的这个文献都是这么证实的。那么在2007年的时候长老会是有1218个的 congregations， 就是中文叫做小会。那当然它有另外的中会，还有呢总会，那它大概有22万个这个会友数。那么地方教会在根据2007年的一个教士报告。是说呢，有201个教会的聚会的这个会堂，有呢是个将近12万的这个会友数，而这2者都被称为本土化的教会当然呢，这个被称本土化的这个时空都不太一样的地方教会是在中国的时候被称为本土化的教会，那么长老会在台湾被称为呢本土化的教会那等会我会回头来再多做解释。那我们可以看一下这个长老会它的这个科层化那长老会的科层化，刚刚其实我已经提过了，它有一个总会，然后有26个分中会，然后有这个1000多个小会那么也因为这个科层化，再加上呢，在过程中他们通过了这个好几次的这个高票通过了一些的这个对于国家的这个政治的宣言，所以呢，在长老会这个内部就形成了一个这个权力高度集中的现象。那么从1999年开始，这你可以看得到，这个只要碰到大选长老会呢通常就有很大的行动。譬如说1999年长老会的总会他就发出了牧函一个牧养众教会的一个函，那么鼓励大家去投票。那事实上呢，2000年的这个总统大选的确是这个在台湾这个历次总统大选里面呢，投票率最高的一次这个跟他的这个牧函有没有关系我想这个是一定是有某种程度上的关系，并且呢，长老会也成立了这个陈水扁这个的所谓的停扁后援会这个来为这个陈水扁这个竞选。那2004年同样是这样，那2008年呢仍然是这样2008年是另外一次的总统大选，那么长老会发出了牧函说这是台湾的生死攸关之刻但是呢这个后来不是民进党的这个候选人当选，然后呢接下来2009年其实这个是一个县市长的这个这是个几个市的选举也一样但每一次长老会都宣称他们所关心的是台湾能成为一个新的独立的国家。那甚至于在最后的一次的这个牧函，就比较近的一次，说要借着选票对这个中国说不对于呢亲中的马政府说不那么这个是呢长老会就着总会以议长还有呢总干事为名义他们呢这个事实上这个会有更多，我只是举几个例子他们有这个权力集中的现象之后，他们呢在这些地方上，他们就可以说有非常频繁的举动。那么我们就不禁要问，难道长老会内部没有反省的声音吗？事实上是有的。2004年的时候这个目前担任总干事的 张德谦牧师在他就任之前，他就写了一篇文章，是一篇的反省文章题目就叫做颜色之外因为他发现他要就任总干事的长老会已经是被大家公认为是绿色的长老会所以他就问说，绿色的长老会吗？当然他有很多的反省文章这个在我的论文头你会看得到很多面的反省。那么他们内部也有反省，说关于长老会的这个神学教育有的反省。
Professor Joe, 2 minutes.
2 minutes, OK， 好。所以呢，这个你会发现，无论内部怎么反省，外部怎么样子的这个批评他们这个总会所做的仍然是这个一直的做。所以呢，我就姑且借用他们的话这个他们的政教关系呢是被整个课程化所绑架的再加上呢，他们非常强调这个台湾的民族主义呢，事实上是造成了这个族群中更多的分裂。那看看地方教会呢，是一地一会，然后呢，它这个中间是借着的这个基督的身体这样一个非正式、这个非呢组织性的关系那么这样的一个教义呢，可以防止大的联，就是超过地方教会以上的这种联合，也可以防止呢小的分，在一个地方教会里面呢，这个族群文化啦、语言的这种分别这个是呢地方教会的这个教义这个根据圣经的发展出来的教义的一个非常重要的特点，就是它是非科层化的。那么地方教会的这个政教关系呢，也是这个是不参与政治，并且它有很强的这个凝聚性和它的效率。这个都不是我说的，这是一本书底下这个这本 KT 这个 CT 郭承天教授的一本书所提到的。事实上，他那本书是讲这个 remarkable cohesion and efficiency。那么事实上呢，地方教会呢，虽然不参与政治，却在社会关怀上非常的这个重视。比如说，他是第一个这个在生命教育这件事上这个去花这个2000年10年之久，这个进行生命教育。生命教育就是台湾的政府希望对于台湾的这个学生进行这个有一个全人整全的一个人生观，所以从小学、中学这个就有生命教育的课程那么这个地方教会是去呢做这件事，并且呢在灾难之后是长期的驻留在这个有灾难的区域做心灵重建的工作作为做个结论。那么我们会发现呢，整个分析下来当然有很多原因，但其中呢有一个最关键的原因。
1 minute for your conclusion. Can you do that?
Yes.
Okay,
This is
great.
a conclusion. Thank you. 这个关键的这个因素就是呢科层化。科层化使得呢台湾的宗教团体法的立法失败了。那么在长老会呢，科层化也是呢这个让他的整个政教关系，不论是这个内部如何反省，外部如何批评，他仍然是照着原来的这个模式呢，只好继续进行。我就借用他们的话，这个是一个被绑架的政教关系那么事实上这样的一个本土化，事实上是造成一种分化的本土化。而在地方教会呢，这是一个非这个科层化的一个，有个学者称它为叫做有机式的结构。那么是它的一个这个重要这个关键的因素，使得它能够在不参与政治，却又能够呢在族群和谐上，所以呢这个可以说这样的一个本土化是一个凝聚的本土化。谢谢。
In keeping with the custom that we've had so far, why don't we open it up for questions for Professor Joe? And why don't we have a couple minutes of questions? Down here? Over here? Lauren?
Hi, I'm Lauren Homer. I'm a international lawyer, and I've actually done some work in Taiwan. And I suppose one thing that you could put into your new law is a provision that religious groups can't engage in political activity, which we have in the U.S., which is often a point of contention. But I've also noticed in Taiwan that there seems to be a tendency for church organizations to kind of lose their way also in the area of property. And there have been some big problems with church properties being used by church organizations or individual pastors for their own benefit. And I wonder if you could comment on that.
这的确是其实刚刚提到的啊，就是关于很多教会的教产啊。那么在这个事实上这个宗教团体法并没有通过，所以目前台湾政府呢对于宗教团体的管理呢，基本上还是用一般的这个人团法、人民团体法啊，这个他们形成财团法人。那么其实从目前整个来看，是一个我个人认为，社会学家认为这是一个正常的发展，是一个很好的发展，所以他们才会称它为这个宗教奇迹啊。但是对于已经科层化的一个所谓的教会来说，他是非常不满意的啊。因为譬如说长老会有200个财团法人，那每一个财团法人的这个里面的董事啊、董事长的选举都是可以独立的。所以换句话说呢，这个长老会了，他就发现他对这200个财团法人他是完全失控的状态。啊，所以他很不希望这个状况继续下去，他希望借着一个宗教团体法，一口气把200个财团法人全部抓回来。但是呢，事实上国家又不可能第一种这种宗教团体法让这个任何一个宗教团体去想要他得到他所得到的呀。谢谢。
那我用中文问吧。
好，谢谢。
那我以为好像是台湾的那个长老会，他70、80年代的时候，他跟党外的运动好像有很多比较近的历史背景关系。
对。
那也许呢，那个长老会的律师方面，好像是不是跟这个历史背景关系有关系？
非常有关系。
不一定是跟你说的那个 bureaucratization。OK，
非常好的问题。非常好的问题。那事实上呢，这个基督徒对于呢社会的不公义的现象啊，或者说他希望国家如何，就是个人基督徒很多人都有想法的啊。但是呢，话说回来，如果你不是在一个有科层化、一个组织性非常强的一个教会，你这个人你所发出来的声音是很有限的啊。那长老会在这个80年代初期是对党外他有一种的这个支持啊。那到最后呢，事实上他就变成卷入了整个这个民进党的执政。那么到现在变成事实上他们觉得很困窘的，因为呢陈水扁啊这个已经是贪污的这个事实已经是成为这个法院的正式的判决啊。所以呢这个意思就是说，他如果只是个人的基督徒，或者这个有一群的基督徒，他们对于这个社会的公义，他们要出来说话，那个跟了这个一整个团体以总会啊为这个说话，然后呢那么深入的卷入政治呢，我想这个是这两个我想是完全不一样的。
Yes, sir. I'm Janet Carroll. I'm a married sister and familiar quite a bit with Taiwan's situation, where I lived and worked for many years. I wondered if you'd extend your comments about the impact on the Catholic communities in Taiwan. I realize that you don't cite them as a major area, but they do have an extensive institutional presence, certainly across the island, including several major Catholic universities and so on. Thank you.
好，关于天主教，我的确在论文里头并没有太多的谈论啊。不过就像刚刚所谈到的，天主教他们目前基本上还是跟往常的运作是一样的，还是一个制度性的一个宗教。那么他所担心的每一个天主堂可以去独自登记，到目前是还没有发生。那事实上这个宗教团体法也并没有通过啊，所以这就是很有趣的一件事情啊！大家来在一起，这个草拟的一个案，然后一读通过以后呢，这个所有这个参与草拟案的这个大团体呢，没有哪一个继续去 push 他让他通过的，因为心里都想他最好不要通过。那天主教是目前基本上就我所了解的是维持现状啊。那当然天主教也有一些的财团法人，没有像长老会那么多，就他们也有一些的这个医院啊。或者是一些的这个慈善机构的财团法人，可能运作的还不错啊，并不像长老会那样发现太多的这种财团法人失控的状况，所以呢，并没有太听说他们在这件事上有什么特别的反应。
Is there other questions? We can save up questions for the end. Maybe if we can move along. Is there one more question? No. So our second speaker today is André Laliberté from Ottawa University and a former scholar here at the Wilson Center. And he is going to be talking about the Communist Party and religious plurality.
现我要说，我真的不好意思，因为我不用中文，因为我怕我的口音太重，所以没有办法表示我的意见观念。好，谢谢，不好意思。好。First of all, I would like to say that I will depart a little bit from my script. I will not say much about plurality because yesterday the speaker talked so eloquently about it, much better than I could do. So I would like to focus instead on the second part of my paper, which is the regulation of religious affairs, and in particular the political obstacles that this is facing. But first, I would like to thank the organizer of these conferences, not for inviting me, but for inviting so many impressive scholars. I think it really needs to be said that I was really impressed, and I know I'm not the only one, by the quality and the level of scholarship. And I think it needs to be said because it's important to remember that 10 years ago, talking about many of the issues that we have raised here was something very difficult, if not impossible. 我记得我在北京10年前，我说一个演讲，这是有关宗教与慈善，好像我是一个外星人。So I'm really pleased to hear that today you can address those issues. So the first thing I want to say about the regulation of religious affairs, I'm not going to go into the details. Again, this was done so nicely yesterday in the talk by Professor Liu Peng. But what I really want to emphasize, to keep in mind, is that the bureaucracy for religious affairs in China, which, by the way, I visited this year, and again, I was impressed by the quality of knowledge on religion within that organization. We tend to forget the State Administration of Religious Affairs is responsible for looking at religious organizations, but we forget there's also a research institute within that association. And people who are very, very knowledgeable, open, frank, candid about the status of religion in China, which was quite a pleasant surprise to see. But the problem is that the bureaucracy for religious affairs at all levels is not considered a priority of the government. So the problem, of course, is that it does not enjoy a high status in the state administration. It's true also at all level of government. When you go at lower levels, at the provincial, prefecture, of district, or district levels of government, you would see that religious affairs got fused with national minority affairs. So this is considered not a very important issue to deal with. However, as again was said yesterday, we can see that local governments have developed over the years a more pragmatic approach in their relation with different religious organizations. And what I mean by that is that they not only have developed more pragmatic relations, but they also have developed policies that differ from different localization, different districts, with respect to different actors in societies that are not considered necessarily religious associations, but that would have activities that we would, in other contexts, in other societies, consider religious. We had the example of charities, for example, charities that are undertaken by organizations that do not have the name Buddhist or Christian attached to them. But when you talk to the people who do these activities, you realize those people are affiliated to religious associations. So you have, on the margin of the official organizations, you have a lot of activities that is happening. And these activities are happening because local governments prefer to look the other way. They prefer to let those things happen. And why do they do that? They do that because it serves pragmatic reasons. It serves local interests. Over the years, I've been in the Jiangnan region and observed that religious organization, not only local, but also religious organization coming from Taiwan, could do activities that, in theory, they should not do. Yesterday, we were talking about the limitations for religious organization. They are not supposed to get involved in education. They are not supposed to get involved in healthcare, but sometimes they do. Sometimes they do, and the reason why they do that is simply, again, because the local governments consider that this is helping the local community, this is helping a neighborhood, or this is helping communities. So, along with that, and again, that speaks to the relative openness of local governments and local bureaucracies for religious affairs. You see more and more religious activities happening in China that are really departing from the rules, regulation of the 5 established and recognized religions. You go visit Buddhist temples, and you see the way people are worshipping is sometimes something that is not recognized as really not really fitting the regulations of, say, the Buddhist Association. People will just burn God money. They would do practice that, of course, are recognized by all Chinese as popular religions. Which raised the question, where is religious regulation going to evolve in the next few years? There's a lot of debate happening in the bureaucracy of religious affairs, lots of discussion happening in different Danwei in the central government as to whether the current regulation of religious affairs is not limited, whether the government should recognize a 6th religion. And of course, there has been numerous debates, numerous alternatives explored, but it's still, unfortunately, as we speak, this is on the ice. There were debates about considering folk religion, Minjian Xinjiang, being the 6th religion of China. There were debates, and of course, the scholars who have their nose literally close to the situation really argue for that recognition. But unfortunately, the political direction does not want to follow. Now, I will not say much about the status of Confucianism. Yesterday, the slide by Professor Li Xiangping was really showing very clearly what was happening. This was a debate, perhaps because we don't know much about the specific issue over the recognition of Confucianism, but it's clear now that this is not in the cards. So the question that arises is that there's a general recognition that the current regulations, the current means of recognizing only 5 religions is not working. And the question is, where do we go from there? And again, scholars and experts in China are looking at different models. And the question that we have discussed here and what brought you all here is, when we have those exchanges between Americans and Chinese about what are the alternatives, it's pretty clear that the Chinese government, even if we have a sweeping change of government, is not going to adopt the American models. I mean, this is clear that the religious ecology or the religious economy, depending on which scientific approach you use, is so different that, of course, the model of state-church separation is not relevant to China. But when we say this, we have to remember that the Chinese don't have to look only at the United States. And we have to remember also that when we talk about a Western approach to relation between religion and state, there are different models even in the West. I'm from Canada. We have an approach that is slightly different from the American one. You go to France. I know that France does not have a good name with respect to that issue. And that's, I think it's founded because France, in its early idea of separation between church and state, has developed a model that has been adopted by the Communist Party. There's no question. Of course, the general political context of France is radically different, we have to remember. But you also have in Europe, we forget that we have lots of countries, a majority of countries, that have established religions. That does not prevent them to have evolved from that situation of established religion to become countries with freedom of conscience. And of course, China has plenty of models to look around. We discussed yesterday about Hong Kong, Taiwan, Singapore, with all the limitations, of course, that are posed by these societies because of their small scale. But I think it is worth exploring. And why limit ourselves to societies with a Chinese heritage? We can look to Japan. We can look to South Korea. There's different approaches that the Chinese government can choose. And I think that the argument that, well, China has a Goqing and cannot really modify his approach, is something that we really should question, because religion changes. If you look at the religious ecology, again, of China since 1949, the changes are just tremendous. So there is no reason to think that relation between religion and state in China cannot also change. Not only the religion themselves change, but also the view of the Chinese towards religion is changing. It's quite remarkable. 20 years ago, you are told by friends in China or Chinese friends coming here saying, well, we don't have religion. Now today, opinions are much more sophisticated, varied. That's the important thing to remember. Now the question is, where will the government go from the current form of regulation? So I will just outline three different scenarios, three possibilities for how the Chinese government is going to regulate religion. Well, the CCP can continue to muddle through, can continue to recognize only those currently existing 5 religions, and local governments continue to apply a pragmatic approach which is limited to different localities according to circumstances. And why they would continue to do that? Because very often they benefit because the recognition of different practices is benefiting from relations with investors. For example, Iguandao is practiced in some localities in the PRC, even though Iguandao is not recognized. But local governments realize that they have Taiwanese investors who themselves are members of Iguandao, and they recognize that these people should be accommodated. So even though it's not recognized, the local bureaucracy will find a way to say that, well, those people are actually Taoist or Buddhist, depending on the local government view. So this policy can be continued. That's an option that is offered to the party, but you can imagine very well that this policy is unstable and will face lots of questioning. Then the second option is whether Confucianism or folk religion is going to be considered a possible 6th religion for China. And there are some strong pressure in that direction. But I'm not sure if it's a development that we should celebrate, because people who are pushing for that are not necessarily people who think about freedom of religion, but people who have a very different agenda. What they would like to have is a guojiao. We discussed this this morning. People who would like to have something that is more representative of a Chinese tradition. People who have this value would say, for example, that Buddhism is not a Chinese religion, because as you know, it's coming from India. Of course, that flies in the face of the reality that Buddhism has been indigenized for so many years to China. So that's
2 minutes.
Okay, thank you. And the third option, of course, is a major overhaul, which we can think possible only if we have a sweeping change in the mentality of the Communist Party. And I will conclude with the main difficulty that remains. The main difficulty that remains is really, I don't think it's the public administration. It's not the state administration that is the problem. I think that any effort that is going to be made in regulation and legislation, and any effort that is made in improving administration will go nowhere unless it's really at the political level that there is change. And this is really the Communist Party that will have to change its approach to religion. But the problem, the fundamental problem, is that the Communist Party think that its worldview is very difficult to reconcile with the very idea on which the development of the different religions in China is leading, which is the idea of pluralism. In my paper, I talked about plurality, which to describe the diversity. Pluralism is something different. It's a political and philosophical approach to believe that diversity is a good thing, diversity of worldviews, diversity of opinions. And the problem is that the Communist Party had issues with this very idea of pluralism because the Communist Party has a worldview that is premised on something that is unique and unchangeable, which is the law of historical development, based on a theory of history that is the functional equivalent to natural law. So this is an obstacle, and I really, really wish that all of you here coming from China will continue your good work and that people in the government will listen to you. Thank you very much.
Questions for Professor La Liberté? Oh, got one in the back.
Thank you, Andre. That was really, really interesting and full of information. Let me just ask your opinion about the comparison with the rapid transformation that's taken place economically. Did that require an equivalent change of worldview, and does that give us any hope then that one might take place on this front?
Okay, when I'm teaching my class on Chinese politics, I explain to my students why is it that the Communist Party choose capitalism. And then I just quote from Deng Xiaoping. Deng Xiaoping said that communism will happen when the forces of production are developed sufficiently enough. So Deng Xiaoping managed to change radically the economy of China, but he managed to do that and use his justification by still making reference to Marxism. And this morning there was some very, very interesting things that were said about the Marxist worldview, and it's true that Marxism was not interpreted correctly, or I would say comprehensively. It's true that Marx did say something about the revolutionary potential of religion. He did say that, and many of the new left scholars have reflected on that as well. But the way that Marxism was adopted in China is very different from the original Marxism. So the change of mind would be necessary within the Communist Party, within the Institute of Marxist-Leninism, for example. So you would need to have a very, very strong theoretical discussion on the status of religion and its influence. We could look at current debates happening about religion's utility, if you like, for society, as trying to get that argument forward, that maybe religion is a good thing, period, regardless of its utility to Chinese society. I don't think that right now we can say there's unanimity on that score.
Another one right here. Can you identify yourself and your affiliation?
Sure. John Barwick with Global China Center. Just to follow on a little bit from that question, I know in recent years the Chinese Communist Party has invested a fair amount of resources in trying to further develop Marxist thinking and its propagation in China. In terms of those efforts, do you see any changes happening in how they understand Marxism that would have any kind of positive implication for some of the issues we're discussing here?
Okay, when you said the Communist Party is investing in the study of Marxism, do you mean that, I mean, there's many different meanings we can ascribe to that. I mean, I know that there's Bolshevik celebration of the Cultural Revolution. There's different ways. You know, I don't think that Bolshevik's effort to revive the Cultural Revolution is going to go very far. I mean, it's fraught with danger.
I was actually thinking more of the in Beijing at the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences. I believe that they started a center there that was doing a lot in this area. So I was thinking more from an academic standpoint, not really from the political type of standpoint.
Well, if investing in Marxism is leading forward to criticize Marxism, because in the West, I mean, we have plenty of departments, including mine, where Marxists are simply a new kind of people in terms of their way to look at the world. And so if the Communist Party, again, is investing on the study of Marxism and to really encourage debate, I think why not?
When we move on to keep this on track, our next speaker is Professor Shuhi Hua from Fudan University, and he's going to be talking about the United Front and security to foci of China's religious policy.
Could I ask your permission to deliver my paper here from here? Because I'm nearsighted. I cannot really.
I'm farsighted, so I can't even see you now. So.
Okay. Thank you for the special treatment to the handicapped. Well, actually, I'm terribly sorry for not being able to give you the my paper, because my computer has been on strike for the last 20 days, starting from the demonstrations as happened at the same time in the United States.
Are they related?
Actually, yes. Well, the title of my paper is United Front and National Security. I regard them as two focal points of China's religious policy. This is not really an empirical study. It's a policy research paper. Since the PRC, People's Republic of China, was founded some 62 years ago, China's religious landscape, as well as the Communist Party of China's policy towards religion, has experienced a big change. But national security and the United Front have remained as the two focal considerations, major considerations of this policy, even though the relationship between these two policy lines have changed over time. In my presentation, I'm trying to analyze the interactions between these two policy lines and try to provide a new perspective to examine the history of the Communist Party's policy towards religion. The first part of my presentation deals with the origin and formation of these two policy lines of the United Front and national security. Ever since the founding of the PRC, religion has been looming large in the government's national security consideration. Around time of the CPC's takeover and in the beginning years of the new government, it was understandable for the Chinese CPC government to regard religion as a national security issue, since most of the country's religious groups had either had close ties with the nationalist party or with the Western countries, especially those imported religion, quote unquote, such namely Catholic Church and various Protestant denominations, and some of which were still controlled by mission boards in the West. In the eyes of the new government, religious self-government and control were the national sovereignty issue, and therefore it falls into the territory of national security. With the outbreak of the Korean War, religion became further securitized in the new government's religious policy. On the other hand, the new government continued to implement the United Front line policy formed during the 8 years of the anti-Japanese war, starting from 1938 to 1945. The essence of United Front policy was to unify and mobilize as many people as possible, including religious believers, to maximize the popular support, to strive for certain goals of the country or the party. It was based on this United Front policy that a common platform, the first constitution of the new government, secured for religion a legal position in the newly founded socialist country. Therefore, since the early 1950s, national security and the United Front has emerged as two major policy lines of the Chinese government toward religion, even though these two lines have been expressed in various forms and under different names. These two considerations of national security and the United Front have supplemented and interacted with each other, and their interaction could be taken as an important method, important way to test, to examine the DNA of the Chinese Communist Party's religious policy. The second part deals with the interaction of policy lines of United Front and national security in the last 60 years. Actually, there's nothing quite unique about these two policy considerations. For any country on this planet, there's nothing more important than territorial integrity and national sovereignty. And there isn't a more important goal of governance than economical prosperity and social solidarity. The problem faced by Chinese government, however, is to strike a proper balance between these two policy lines and prevent the national security from becoming a dominating or even the sole consideration of China's religious policy. It has turned out that China's religious policy have been fluctuated between these two policy lines in the last 6 decades. And this fluctuation has created serious consequences for both the religion and the religious policy in China. We can roughly divide the CPC's policy towards religion in the last 60 plus years into 4 periods. And during each period, the emphasis was given to one of these policy lines. Because of the time limit, I have to cut the long stories shorter. The first period, starting from 1949 to 1957, could be termed as the formation period of these two policy lines of United Front and national security, 形成期. I found from this conference that Chinese language is really powerful, especially in debate. So I will switch back to Chinese whenever possible. The second period, during this period, the national security is the major consideration of the government, whereas the United Front is a minor consideration. The second period, it's starting from 1957 to 1976, could be termed as imbalanced or lopsided development of these two policy lines, 失衡期. During this period, the national security line became predominant, while the United Front line gradually ceased to exist. All these so-called anti-religious activities and policies reached a peak during the so-called Cultural Revolution, and during which all the religious activities and practice were either stopped or forced to go underground. The third period, starting from 1976 to 1989, could be termed as the adjustment period of the two policy lines, 调整期. During this period, China began to open its closed door to the outside world, and the general policy of making economic construction as the central mission of the country was formally established. Under these circumstances, the United Front policy line was restored and strengthened, whereas the national security line began to relax. The fourth period, since 1989, could be termed as transitional or reform period, 转型期. The end of the Cold War has brought about, I will say a few more words about this period, the tremendous change to the international politics. Religion has, as some scholars claim, returned from so-called Westphalia exile to the central stage of international relations. Chinese leaders repeated on many occasions that great attention should be paid to the role of religion in the collapse of the former Soviet Union and the Eastern Europe countries. And the religious issues concern about national unity and integrity, concern about infiltration and anti-infiltration, and also concern about the peaceful evolution and anti-peaceful evolution. On the other hand, the Chinese government still adhered to its religious policy of policy line of United Front, and proposed 2 major tasks for its religious work in the post-Cold War era. Namely, guiding religion and religious groups to adapt to the socialist society and managing religious affairs according to the law. Regulations on religious affairs issued by the State Council in 2004 has been generally regarded as the milestone in the legal development of China in the area of religion. And the religious work of the government began to take the so-called double track of relying on both regulations and policies. In a nutshell, during this period, the United Front replaced the national security as a more important consideration of the government's religious policy. Meanwhile, the legal and the regulation line of the government's religious work began to take shape, becoming one of the major features of this transitional period of China's religious policy. Concluding remarks. There are several. First, the Chinese government need to keep a proper balance between the two policy lines of United Front and national security. As mentioned earlier, since the formation of these two policy lines, they have undergone 4 periods in the last 6+ years. And the general tendency is the shifting of emphasis from national security to the United Front, or from the national security-centered policy to the United Front-centered policy, even though there are lots of exceptions to this general tendency. The historical experience indicates once again that imbalanced development of these two policy lines especially the overemphasis of national security-centered approach, will bring about devastating consequences for religion as well as the government's religious work. Second, these two policy lines of United Front and national security have changed both of their connotations and extensions during the last 60 years. I will skip some of the sentences. Thirdly, the above-mentioned tendency is inevitable in the view of the development of both Chinese society and religion. With the elimination of the so-called religious sovereignty issue, the diversification of China's national security interests since the implementation of opened-up and reform policy in the late 1970s, and the initiation of the new policy line of managing religious affairs according to the regulations and law, the national security tension in religious areas has been significantly reduced for the Chinese government, and that has formed a political and a legal foundation for the strengthening of the United Front line. Actually, the strengthening of the United Front policy line is the best means to reduce the national security tension in religious areas. The last one, differing from the practice of the U.S., which also securitized religion as a homeland security issue, since because of the emergence of international religious extremism and the September 11th terrorist attacks, the Chinese government has been securitizing religion from the very beginning. As a government policy, securitizing means putting all the resources for the implementation of certain policy goals. It offered the various government the benefits of obtaining some kind of legitimacy and full power in mobilizing all the resources at their disposal to promote their policies or to deal with so-called national security threats. But its indiscriminating application will lead to the unnecessary appropriation of the social resources, the dilution, obscuring, and even deviation of the strategic goals of the country. That in turn will invalidate the effects of securitizing itself. In view of the diversification of Chinese national interests, it is both necessary and possible for the Chinese government, let me repeat, it's both necessary and possible for the Chinese government to desecuritize religion as much as it can by treating religious issues as a normal social issues. More adequate mobilization of both the United Front line and the legal line of the government's religious work and unhooking religion from national security issue concern, with the purpose of making its religious policy more fully reflect China's social reality of strong state, weak religion, and a new statecraft of governing the country by the rule of law, and also China's international commitment and image as a responsible member of the international community. Thank you for the organizers. Thank you.
Professor Xu, as you said, the Chinese language is powerful, but in English you are succinct. You are at 10 minutes for his presentation, so there is extra time for questions if they're out there.
Abraham Ho from Asia Research Center. One time I had a conversation with a high official at SARA. I was told that whatever the Western world is asking for the religious freedom in China will be fulfilled in 20 years. So it does mean to take time in the process for whatever Western world desires, the so-called religious freedom in China will be done. Your topic today is very, very interesting and eye-opening. And we always thought there are three entities in charging or relating to the religious freedom or any questions in China: the United Front, SARA, and the public security. And this morning we're very delighted to know that national security play a very important role. Okay, my question is that you didn't mention, you said that 4 stages, 4 period. To this year, 2011, which period are we in? What I'm trying to say, since the last year, the Nobel Peace Prize went to a Chinese dissident, anti-government so-called, and with so many human rights lawyers flooding to Washington, D.C. from China, also with the noticeable more arrest of Christians, house churches, and so on church in Beijing. Are we in this national security mode? Turn on? I just see your comment.
那我就用中文吧。西方国家呢讲中国的宗教自由呢，这个往往呢拿这个最高的标准，拿美国标准。我们开玩笑是这个American Standard， 其实 American Standard 又是一个这个 kitchen utensil 的一个 brand 啦。可能是那个厕所的洁具的，其实呢，你想看，加起中国的宗教自由的，这个中国的足球队在世界上排名第100位，对吧？这个中国的这个人均 GDP 是世界上100多位，对吧？这个可能用这个标准来衡量呢，中国呢可能比较合适一点，对吧？美国标准是很好，我们也非常希望达到，但是中国呢，就像中国的足球队，对吧？这个水平还是比较低一点，对吧？那么这个是一个啊，另外一个呢，我总的觉得呢，就是中国呢这个宗教呢，就像一个中国的俗语呢，就叫好马买个驴子驾，可能不是一个好马，可能是一个 crippled 的一个马，但是它是马了，但是马了一个驴子驾，那么就是说，就是比这个西方的媒体报道要好，稍微好一点，对吧？那么这个是可能第二个评价。第三个呢，就是刚直接回答那个 Abraham 的何先生的这个问题啊，有很多这个exceptions 啊，这个我也刚才讲过的啊，这个总的倾向可能是 United Front 是占上风的。你想想看，现在中国是世界上最大的圣经出口国啊，这个中国比美国还要厉害啊！这个美国出版多少圣经？你们自己是 Christian country 啊，对吧？中国是世界上最大的出口国，现在已经超过巴西和韩国。中国是生产了世界上80%的圣诞产品啊，圣诞节的产品。中国生产了这个大量的这个俄国的圣像和印度的圣像啊，中国是世界上最大的宗教产品的出口国啊。这个情况发生了很大变化。我们在学校里，我们开玩笑，这个我在文章里也写到，就是这个中国大学的那个宗教课程比美国还多。我们做了一个比较啊，这个和中国和那个复旦大学和耶鲁大学这个Yale University 啊，我们比较，我们复旦开的课程比 Yale 还多。当然 in terms of quantity, not necessarily in terms of quality， 大概这样的啊。这个就是有很多 exceptions， 但是呢，总的倾向是一个 general tendency 什么 shifting from the national security emphasis to the United Front emphasis. Thank you.
Are there others? We can save them up for the end. Our last speaker on this panel is Professor Cole Durham from Brigham Young Law School. And he's going to be speaking on finding common ground through comparative constitutional law. Professor Durham.
I need to make one thing disappear here. So I'm nearsighted, but I need the PowerPoint, so I'll stand up. But I need to see where you've... There we go.
Do you need my glasses?
Mine are pretty good. Well, I'd like to echo what was said about thanks to the organizers, and particularly echoing Andre's point that I'm thankful that they invited everyone else. And I feel like I should yield my time to some of these other speakers. But let me try and just say a few things about this general theme of this session. Will we find common ground, or will there be continued tension? The religious freedom issue is obviously a sensitive one in the United States, and I think other parts of the world don't quite understand why it's so sensitive, but I think that carrying out dialogue on these issues is very important. I know my experience working in China has been that one of the most effective ways to carry out discussions is not to talk about China with the Chinese, but to talk about other legal systems. And it's really impressive if you can come from the United States and not talk about the United States. That's been my strategy. The point is that sometimes if we can look at other systems jointly, it's easier to find common cause on working on what are really common problems to which we have different approaches. We need to find non-confrontive ways of dialoguing. We need to find ways to work together on common problems. And we need to be able to get beyond our own set of assumptions. That suggests the value of a comparative approach. That led a colleague and I to write this book on law and religion, and I'm not going to be able to go into that. But one of the things we try to do in that book is suggest broader ways of looking across a lot of legal systems so that we're not trying to say this is, so that we don't draw simply on the sound bites of particular legal systems, such as separation of church and state or cooperation in Europe or whatever, but that we try to find ways to look more deeply, both to understand national systems, really a burgeoning field of international law in this area, and the need for a comparative approach. Now let me just say a couple of words about comparative method. In constitutional law, this goes back to Aristotle, who was known to have collected constitutions while he was out collecting biological specimens. Sometimes comparative law is thought of as mere button collecting or flower collecting, something like that. What we really need is a functional approach that looks beyond labels and tries to understand what's really going on. What is most difficult for most of us is to understand the unstated assumptions that we grow up with and that we look at the world with. And often as we look at other societies, we can see their assumptions, but we also see our own assumptions more clearly. Sometimes one thinks of comparative laws, comparative social engineering. This system has a wonderful cog, let's just take it and put it over in this other system. But of course, what we're dealing with in legal situations or in social situations, something more like heart transplants. There can be a very complex organic system. There can be allergic reactions. Those of us from the United States have been noting this a lot lately. There can be rejection phenomena. But we need to remember that religion is a fundamental right, and one of the reasons it keeps coming back is that it is so significant that the fact that people do have religious or spiritual sensitivities means that in every system this plays some kind of central role. It gets adjusted differently in different systems. It gets adjusted all the time. And whenever it gets adjusted, different people or different players in the system are at risk. Now, it seems to me it's important to, there are some fundamental things. My own view is that freedom of religion is foundational for at least three reasons. It's historically foundation because other rights emerged as additional supports for or expansion of religious freedom rights. It's philosophically foundational because it protects the comprehensive belief systems in which other ideas are rooted and from which they derive their meaning. It's also institutionally foundational because it protects and fosters the institutions that engender the vision, the motivation, and the moral support that translate religious and moral ideals into practice. And all of our societies need that to function effectively. Now, this is just a footnote, again, to Brian Grimm, page 206 in his book, but it's one of many pages that helps remind us that religious freedom correlates with, and if I think Brian is working on demonstrating even more powerfully, that it's a causal factor in bringing about many social goods for societies. Okay, now what I'm going to try and do, and I know I will run out of time. I've time this, and I just know I will run out of time, but I will stop whenever I get the signal. I want to say some things about constitutional and human rights at that level, and then also talk some about what you might think of as the subconstitutional domain, or the area where areas of application. I'm going to focus on religious association laws and how they work in the world, just because as a practical matter, this is a key issue. And I was very interested by the last paper, because I think part of what's going on, my question at the end of the last session was, what is the roadblock? And of course, it is the policy concern, the security concerns. And one of the things that I think is helpful, there's a kind of built-in strategy, the way China has been approaching these things, to think if there's a security concern, the way you deal with that is to control things at the registration of the organization. This is a strange way to proceed, actually. It's an instinctive way, it's in a bureaucratic way, but you know, if you wanted to bring economic development into a country, you wouldn't proceed by, but you were worried about pollution, you wouldn't proceed by saying, we're going to look at articles of incorporation to see whether this group is going to pollute or not. That's not the place where you try and exercise the control. We in the United States have plenty of control on abuse of religion. It's just not done in the registration offices of, of the various states. So let me proceed. I want to say some things first about the normative core of freedom of religion or belief. This is based on a lot of thought and working on international instruments, but I'll just proceed through these quickly. A core notion is the internal freedom. That's what was talked about yesterday as the freedom of belief. But of course, in the international system, this can't be the only thing. You could have freedom of belief in the Gulag. That's not a robust theory of freedom. So what you need in addition is the external freedom. This is a key notion. The international instruments is talked about as manifestation of religion. It includes things like worship, teaching, practice, and observance. Those are the international covenant phrases. But it's more than just worship. It's not just internal belief. It's not even just worship. It's broader than that. Includes non-coercion, non-discrimination. We had some papers yesterday about religious autonomy. The freedom not only of the individual but of the group, because the individual freedom can be meaningless if the groups are not free to act authentically. There's concerns about parental and child's rights, special treaties on that. And of course there are limitations. I don't know of any legal system, and I have to, including the United States, where we don't have significant limitations on freedom of religion, where there are appropriate reasons for the limitations. How you work out and spell out what that is another issue, but that's very important to recognize and understand. And then the non-derogation principles. People often forget that in the international instruments, religious freedom is one of the rights that you cannot derogate from, even in times of national emergency. I mean, you can apply limitations if there's safety and other kinds of concerns, but this underscores the significance of this right. So these are sort of internationally the way these religious freedom is looked at. These are familiar notions. Now let me just think about the viewpoint, because we've talked about what the viewpoint should be of thinking about these things. Should it be a U.S. viewpoint? Well, presumably China would say no to that. Should it be a Western viewpoint? Also, no. But should it be a Chinese viewpoint? It's also problematic. Should it be an international law viewpoint? It seems to me that one of the things one has to think about is, should it be the viewpoint from the victim's standpoint? a story that I'd like to track down, maybe some of you know where the exact quote is. Someone asked Asma Jahangir, the former special rapporteur, which group is most affected by religious freedom violations? She said, human beings. There is actually no empirical evidence that I know of that individuals and groups adversely affected do not want religious freedom protections. There are some states that don't necessarily want it, but the victims quite universally do. Now let me just shift and talk about Article 36 of the Chinese Constitution. I'm not going to go through the whole thing. I want to focus on one of the key phrases that I think all of us recognize as one of the key phrases. The state protects normal religious activities. The question is, what is normal? And I think one of the questions in light of today's discussion is how much flexibility both the leadership or people at the local levels have to expand what constitutes normal. It's a good thing to be normal. It's hard, but one should have a quite broad view of this. And this is the UN Human Rights Committee's interpretation of what the range of religion should be. This is commenting on this is the official comment on Article 18, which of course is the religion provision of the International Covenant. Article 18 protects theistic, non-theistic, and atheistic beliefs, very broad range, as well as the right not to profess any religion or belief. The terms belief and religion are to be broadly construed. Article 18 is not limited in its application to traditional religions or to religions and beliefs with institutional characteristics or practices analogous to those of traditional religions. It's broader than normal, and that is, I think, quite a universal in the way things are thought about. Now, let me just say, I think I will go through this quickly, but
About 2 more minutes?
Yeah, 2 minutes, yeah.
3?
Yeah, okay.
Okay.
Then I'll skip really quickly. My own sense is that the international instruments really got the limitations right in fundamental ways if these are understood narrowly. And essentially, let me skip to this. They may only be imposed on manifestations. You don't impose religions on internal beliefs. They must be prescribed by law. Formally, there needs to be a law behind the restrictions, and the law has to be qualitatively consistent with the rule of law. It can't be vague, it can't be retroactive, and so forth. It has to further one of the legitimating grounds articulated in the international instruments, but the temptation is to say, oh, this legislation furthers health or public order or safety, but that's not enough. You really have to have a necessity constraint. Limitations must be proportionate. They need to be narrowly tailored. Limitations must be neutral and impartial. And among other things, they're not really necessary if they're counterproductive. And I mention that because I think as we get to think about registration laws, these are laws about the rights of religious communities to acquire legal personality. And in general, my experience is restrictive registration laws are not necessary. They're not necessary for a couple of reasons. One reason is you can have more narrowly crafted criminal laws that will address the real problems, and you don't need to use someone in a bureaucratic office where organizations are being set up to manage things. This is a more complex discussion, but I think that's sort of the main point. I'm going to skip over some of these other things. I did give the organizers belatedly an article on the legal status of religious organizations, which you'll be able to get from them. What one of the things that happens when you look at registration laws from a comparative basis is people tend to compare apples and oranges. What's important is what I call the base level entity status. Simple things, ability to set up a bank account, acquire property, enter into contracts, sue and be sued, pursue land approvals, invite foreign religious leaders. In short, to engage in the full range of activities that one normally associates with religion.
Can we? I'm sure there's other people asking questions. Can we?
Yeah. So let me just come to the end. In the extended PowerPoint, I've got a lot of examples of registration laws. I knew I was going to run out of time, so I will stop, and you can look at those. But I think the point I want to make is this is one example of an area where there are, it's an area in constitutional orbit, if you will, where we can approach things in a comparative way. There's a lot to learn. There's a lot of experience. And the issue, sort of with respect to securitization, is if we do need some security in all of our countries. It can go overboard. There's a temptation for the people running security for that to go overboard, and we need to resist that temptation. And that resistance is a battle that we're all engaged in, and that we all need to work on, and that we can work on together in fruitful, comparative ways. Let me stop.
Thank you. I'm sorry for being a taskmaster on time, because it was fascinating, because I myself, and in terms of engaging with Chinese officials on religious freedom, find that there is no common language. There is very difficult, and people talk past each other, often in terms of that apples and oranges way, or if we can say in a cross-cultural way, lychee and durian. So maybe this is something that this conference can sort of help bridge the gap. But question here in front.
我是张志刚，来自北京大学。刚才教授说他要让给大家一点时间，其实他没有，所以说我回过头来要占用他一点时间。我因为会到了最后了，大家应该作为学者应该非常的坦率去谈自己的感受，所以说我听了教授的话，我觉得我们仿佛回到了，因为这2天会大家双方了解很多，但是最后这个发言让我好像我们又回到了这个起点，就是原点，我觉得这个原点，我觉得就是双方的这个相互的了解和理解是多么重要，多么重要。我觉得我听了教授的发言，我感觉是一个美国的法律教授在告诉一个中国北京大学的哲学教授应该怎么去做，我觉得这个我的真实的感受是这个样。
Your apple is orange.
我之所以说是一个美国的观点，从教授的立论来说，因为哲学家是讲立论的，你首先谈的宗教自由，它的历史的重要性，其次你才谈哲学的重要性。那这个我中国教授非常了解美国的历史我在美国做了很多年，我觉得这是一种美国的情节。站在从美国的历史来看，的确是这个样子的。但是在西方未必如此。从整个西方的文化来看，我们知道西方经历过宗教的战争，然后是宗教的迫害，再往后才是宗教的宽容。从宗教的宽容，从洛克等人的这个政治哲学，才到了你谈的宗教的自由。所以说我觉得就是美国的这个历史非常短，是吧？我觉得在美国的你可以这样的去立论。我也知道这个对于美国人是一个底线非常的重要。你说美国是建国的，就是一切都是建立在宗教自由基础上。可是我坦率的告诉你，要我的感受，现在中美关系的一切麻烦也来自于这个概念这个概念。所以说我觉得我们双方需要去互相的理解。我再提供一个角度，就是我觉得你不了解中国的 中国的历
Can the
史。
can the professor respond how he feels?
我知道，That's a word 。我之所以不了解中国历史，就是一个就是在中国学者强调两个概念，一个是德治，一个是法治。啊，中国在历史上从历史文化思想，特别哲学上是非常强调德治的，啊。那么，美国是非常强调法治。当然，我们最近也向西方学习，我们也应该加强的法治，啊。但是我们把德治，看得非常重要的，啊。这也是为什么哲学家在中国要比法学家重要。
Okay. Let me first apologize. Part of this is, I think, not going back to the beginning, but having 15 minutes is impossible. What I've found is what's really necessary is to be able to get past the point where we're suspicious of each other's agendas, so that we read what is being said as sort of telling people how to do things. And the truth is, if you would when you see the other half of my PowerPoints, you will see that I have even more detailed things about religious associations. But part of what's going on here is I don't know how else to start really getting past the first impressions, and frankly, they're just differences. There's an American style of approach to this kind of thing where you look at the problems rather than necessarily all the conceptual background. Not that the conceptual background isn't important, but to really get to the core of things, we have to look at some concrete things and then understand. I am really the instinct to manage the risks of religious organizations through using religious association law is quite widespread in Asia in particular. And one of the problems is, and it makes for a problem in relations, as you say, because we truly don't get how we get how it fouls everyone up, but we don't get how it focuses on the people that are the real problem. And so, and I think part of the issue is thinking concretely about these areas of law, recognizing, the larger point of my book is precisely that you shouldn't try to impose a particular thing, that different countries are going to have different realities. But, we have registration. Americans usually don't know this. We have registration laws in every American state.
Yes, sir.
Except possibly West Virginia, but for historical reasons. But they work in ways that really facilitate religion, but but the systems are capable of identifying the problems. So a starting point is to say, this works for us. You're saying this wouldn't work for you. What would work? And so if in the 15 minutes it came across as you should do this, this, and this, what I was trying to do is look. This was not based on U.S. stuff. It's based on international precedents, and trying to figure out this is how a lot of people in the world are seeing these issues, who have a lot of experience both with security and with freedom issues. Would this help? Would this, as you look at this, would you see a way that would work for China? I mean, I thought one of the great statements was China is going to solve its own problems. No one from outside can do it. But one of the things I've learned is that Chinese, from philosophically, otherwise, are very good at picking up and seeing what the options are. And I think one of the best things we can do is look at these things jointly, and then you will find some solutions. But if we're looking at them jointly, I think it will reduce stress levels between our countries.
I've been told that I really need to sort of wrap this up. Maybe there can be some discussions afterwards. I think we should see this as the first step in a journey of 10,000 miles, or maybe not that long. But so I think that there will be other opportunities, hopefully, to whether through the Asia Research Foundation or others, to sort of get together and continue to talking about these issues to find out what would work. And so we aren't talking in terms of apples and oranges, but we find a common language, whether it's international law or sort of national security and what that interpreted means, how you can balance national security and civil liberties within your structures. So I think this is, again, a first step and a very good one. I'm not going to end this conversation, so I think Dr. Caleb Zia is going to come up and tell you where you're going to go next, and maybe also wrap this up in a way that's more appropriate than I can do.
Oh, you're doing a fine job. I just want to take this opportunity to thank all of you who come even during the rain. It's not easy. I'm sure if it doesn't rain, this house will be packed. But for those that come, making the effort, thank you very much. Now, today is being, the whole session is being recorded. It's a simulcast. Yesterday's session is also recorded. It will be on the Wilson Center's website, but you can also go to ARC's website, and there'll be a link to the session. So you can, if you miss something, hopefully you'll be able to get to the website and see it, okay? This is the beginning of what we are trying to do. And hopefully, through this session, yesterday and today, if we generate enough interest, hopefully we will have more sessions to come. It's just so thankful that we have so many scholars, coming from so many places, and it's not easy to assemble that many people. But if this is a good thing, we will come together. And as I say before, through this kind of interaction, we will bring understanding. There's a lot of misinformation out there, and hopefully we will be able to work something out. And that's what we are hoping to do. And with that, I want to thank you. Now, for those who have got a number from me, you know where to go, okay? And we'll let you know when our next conference like this will happen. Okay? So thank you very much.
Thank you.